we all know that words are important, right? And any time that we work with clients, individuals, teams, or when we're talking on the podcast, try and stay away from the phrase high performance. It's really easy to get caught up in that and talk about it in a throwaway fashion. What we really talk about mostly is performance improvement. The guest on this week's podcast is a guy called Noel Slane. Noel has a stellar record in sales and sales management in software, most recently in cybersecurity software with a company called Opswat, company that he left in rude order a few months ago to set up a business called FoodGuard, which he will talk about in more detail in the podcast. Delighted to be able to share this conversation with you, and probably the first time that I'm able to talk comfortably about a high performance sales culture. Noel was working at a threshold of about 35 million sales based in Tyrone, building up a team locally that was a self-feeding SDR team in cybersecurity from Carrickmore. Incredible story. He talks about culture. He talks about managing an inherited team and the challenges that brings, and the ability to start a team from scratch, and the opportunity that gives you to create a culture from the very start. Some really interesting insights into managing both. He's really, really effervescent about sales and managing and culture. He's studied. He's very considered. He makes decisions that are right for the business rather than making decisions quickly. And it's just a really valuable conversation, I think, for anybody who's running a sales team currently, anyone who manages their own business, and for those salespeople who are interested in improving their performance. Noel shares some really brilliant tips and ideas that can help you look after your own parish as well as helping other people in your team. I hope you enjoy this as much as I enjoyed recording it. I always say that, but this is true. Known Noel for a while as a sound fella, but has got some brilliant guidance and advice to share. Mostly I would record using Zoom or Teams. This time, for some reason, I decided to download WebEx, and it took a dump on me halfway through, but I've edited together. If you come to that point, give it about 2 or 3 seconds, and it should be pretty seamless. So enjoy the podcast, and thanks for tuning in. Noel, how's the form?
Very good.
Thanks
and yourself.
I'm flying, thank God, yeah. Thanks for joining up this afternoon. Kind of need a wee bit of an introduction for these people listening to this. So do you want to just talk about your sales background, and we can talk about your management and football background after
that? Management and football background. I'm not sure about that. So I guess from a selling or sales a marketing perspective, I'm 43. It's the first career I stepped into at the age of 22. So I did a business degree and then did a postgrad in computer and information systems, and found myself into a technology sales role. And from that day to now, I've had a direct selling or sales management or director level role in technology sales, which is, I guess, so it's over 20 years now. So it's amazing how fast the time goes. The first portion of that would have been local in Northern Ireland and Ireland. So Belfast, Northern Irish market, SME focused, and sort of moved up the value chain, if you like. And from around the age of 30, now 43, so I guess the last 13 years, I've worked very much on an international basis for software companies. So I started working with Micro Focus in Belfast, and sort of transitioned out of direct selling into really building and managing and trying to develop high performing sales teams, initially locally and then internationally, which is something that I've really enjoyed and been doing subsequent.
You and I kind of first met when you were working for a company called Promisec. I think it's about 6 years ago, right? So since then, you have worked for kind of pioneering cybersecurity business, which was really the time that you were building this really high performance global sales team, essentially. Would that be fair to say, wouldn't it?
It is. It is. So
And I don't feel uncomfortable about talking about high performance because really this is kind of the crux of what this podcast would always be about anyway. But
yeah,
so can you explain a little bit about that and talk about that company and the good things and the bad things?
yeah. Well, if I can maybe take a step back to when we first started speaking and Promise, like it was a very interesting engagement because it leads on to Opswat, which
Okay.
are fast growing cybersecurity company. Promisec was really interesting in that they approached myself and another engineer at the time, and I'm gonna talk about high performance, but I'm also going to talk about what bad looks like and the experience that I had that really helped forge my thinking and the change or the shift in me in terms around how to build a high performing team. So, with Promisec, it was a VC backed cybersecurity company. Venture capitalists had 40 million already plowed into the business, if you like, by the time I joined. So I joined year 8 out of 10. Um, the company, you couldn't describe it as a success. It was kind of struggling, and the reason I'm sort of raising it was because it gave me a fantastic insight. We're based in Israel, um, I, and Boston. I did a lot of international travel. I became sort of European sales manager, director, and then subsequently then the global head of global sales. And one of the things that I found with that organization was I had come in at the tail end of the development. I hadn't hired the staff. I got to see the development teams in Tel Aviv and in Israel. And the first thing that I recognized was there was a really bad culture. And it had sort of, it seemed to have crept in for a number of years before I had taken over the role. And you could almost describe the company as failing, and the CEO and the investors just wanted to sell the technology. So it was a relatively short stint, but was one of the first things I noticed was that there was a lot of excuses made. So when I would visit Tel Aviv, or initially when I'd taken on the sales team, a lot of what they described to me was the product doesn't work, marketing's not good, um, lots of things that really detracted from them taking responsibility around what they could do and how they could be successful. They talked about strategy, so it got very wide. So as a company, I felt they'd lost their way, and I was in at the end of this, and sort of became very visible and transparent to me that I felt it was extremely difficult to shift them, and that was the one thing that I noted, that when bad culture gets entrenched, it's extremely difficult to change, especially if it's been ongoing for a period of time. So I saw it with both the sales team and the development team, and sometimes it's only when you change the resources that you can actually change the culture if you can't bring them on a journey. And for technology companies, cybersecurity in particular, which is a fast-moving market, if you can't shift people quickly, then you have to often change the resource to get that cultural shift. Um, so I saw that and was witness and was involved in all of that, and it was really, really challenging for me. And it was an experience that really sort of forged me thinking. I did a lot of reading and came across a lot of brilliant material with yourself around Damien Hughes at the time. I read all of his books. Barcelona Way was a fantastic read for me. Leadership as Language, Atomic Habits. So I was sort of reading all those books at the time, thinking this is wrong. How do I fix this? The culture was very negative, but also I guess from I'm going to come to Opswat now in a second. Promisec was an Israeli centric company, and Gartner did a magic quadrant on business styles and types, and it was expressive aggressive. And the top left is expressive aggressive, and the Israelis are at the top left. And I think next to them were the French, and I was managing both. So from a management perspective, I found that I was really stretched. Irish and British and English business cultures are around neutral. so they're not very expressive and aggressive. So it was a real challenge trying to deal and motivate and go through that process of
Give me an
change.
example of a daily challenge you might have had in that. What does that
Well,
look like?
I give you an example. I had a guy that was managing. So France happened to be one of the territories that obviously within the MEA that I was managing. I was managing a number of staff based in Paris. I'll not name the individual, but I managed a number of people in France. Some of them are okay, but the French are extremely adversarial. They will get into a debate. They will argue constantly. They don't always take responsibility. France is a socialist country, and it's probably the only really, successful socialist democracy, if you like, in Europe. And they're very difficult to manage. They don't always take responsibility. So what did that mean for me? It meant that a lot of what I viewed as sensible types of conversation around performance, around change, around activity, ended up in an argument, and it was a continual cycle. The French labour laws are very restrictive, so if you're in a position with a particular staff member that doesn't want to go on at that transition, then you're stuck till an extent because there's a very prolonged potential period of change. Whether you're looking to change that person or that resource or try to bring them on a journey. So I felt it really absorbing. That constant negative battle around trying to bring some of those staff along a journey, and really they had already had some negative experiences with the company. The truth was, some of what they were saying to me was accurate. Some of the strategy the company had taken up until till I had joined wasn't good. The product still did have flaws, but I always felt that was exacerbated by a bad attitude. It was what it was, but from the perspective of managing the French staff, I found that a real challenge, really, really challenging for me. I adopted a number of different strategies, so I'd often have a conversation. I would have had a managerial style to say, right, I'm going to butt heads to see can I get some of these people to climb down. That didn't work. Then the next approach would have been I would have actually thought about the one-to-one reviews, and I'll bring it very fact-based. I'll listen. I'll not speak to see can I get the conversation and the tone and progress made through analysis of data and a more listening approach, if you like, to progress and change. So I found it really challenging, but really I felt like it really grew me and developed me working, with Israelis, particularly the French. Israelis are blunt and direct, and the French are the same. So that was what that looked like for me from a daily perspective.
But you have a lot of things at play there too. You have sort of competencies. You have empowering management. You have people that feel that they're allowed to do stuff. You talk about culture, where they're allowed to thrive and survive and make their own mistakes, or whether they're micromanaged. So there's a whole lot of stuff at play there that it would be hard to identify very quickly.
It is, and I think back to the first point I was saying, if culture becomes entrenched, or bad culture, bad behavior becomes entrenched, it's very difficult to get it shifted. And if good process, I found when I moved to Opswat, and I'll maybe touch on that, I think was sort of the genesis of the question. If you don't have good process for managing and dealing and working through change, and it's not embedded within a team early on, the process of bringing that change about can be really, really challenging and difficult. And that was one of the things I started to try and do at Promisec. How can I put a framework in place that allows this person to understand that I'm here to help and that this is a safe place, and that the performance measures that we're looking to put in place are going to help them be better. So that was probably the biggest. So the skill and will, as you talked about the person, have they the skill to do the job well? Have they the will to do it? Do they want to be successful? Do they want to go through the process of change? So sort of looking at those competencies around a person and then putting a framework for development in place, I think were some of the key things that weren't in place whenever I took the role over at Promisec, that it did and was able to try and implement it at Opswat from the get-go, because it was a clean build and it was really on me from the start.
So talk about Opswat then. So like, and bearing in mind for the people that are listening, you're operating out of the heartland of Tyrone here. This is you're not living in Belfast or Dublin or London. You're operating out of a wee village in Tyrone. So that's brings challenges and everything else. But just paint the picture of the beginning of Opswat, Noel.
So I'll maybe go back to how I met. So Benny Kearney is it sounds like Kearney, which is a Tyrone name, which Sharney is Czarny. He's
I
an
never
Israeli.
thought about that actually.
That's really Jew from Estonia originally. The guy is the founder of Opswat and lived and started the company in San Francisco. So you could describe the business as Silicon Valley centric to start with, and more recently it moved to Tampa. So I met Benny at the Black Hat Cybersecurity Conference in Las Vegas. They were trying to sell their software to Promisec. I met him in a cafe. Himself and Tom Mullen, which are two fantastic guys. Uh, we struck up a bit of a relationship, seemed to get on quite well. And then I think Benny was looking at expanding his European or EMEA business, as it's called, which is really from Ireland to the Middle East. So he sent me a message on LinkedIn to see if I was interested in coming on board, that they wanted to hire a vice president for the region and to build and to scale out the business for them. And I guess at the time he reached out to me, Promisac were getting acquired by the Mirror Group, which was really opportune timing because it was a TAC only purchase, so the sales and marketing teams weren't being retained. And that really presented me with Paul an opportunity to do a clean build. So, and analysing the market across EMEA, where to hire, what resources to choose, what was the strategy going to be, the customers, the products. It was almost like having a Pandora's box of opportunity. That's how I saw it. And it was really on me then in terms of how could I make that successful. Um,
Where do you
so
start with that then? If you've got so much to do, where's the starting point within the planning for that? No.
Um, so what I did was look at the first of all I looked at the business when I took it on. It was $3.75 million across EMEA, and there was two other resources supporting the region. And the first thing I did was look at the install base. I always think it's important, if you're in business, if you're starting fresh, look at the opportunities under your feet. Sometimes I think businesses get very fixated with um, onboarding net new clients. And I know businesses get really hung up on that, new logos, new clients all the time, kind of get new customers. Take a lot of opportunities under your feet. So the first thing I did was I developed a matrix to look at the product stack that we had in Opswat. So we seem to have quite a varied portfolio of products. So I went about the process of scoring them based on my experience. So we did a lot of travel in the first year, and in the first few months, I started to try and build out some strategic intelligence, if you like, around what were the best products and what were the verticals that I was selling them into. What were the countries that had the highest GDP per capita? So I did a map of every country across EMEA on GDP per capita. So I looked at the wealth of all the countries. I then looked at the products and I scored them based on the interactions that I was having and the team as I started to hire them to say, these two or three products out of our seven are the winners. Here are the verticals in which I can sell them into. And here's the countries with the highest GDP per capita that we're going to have the most success. So, sort of, if you like, from a business perspective, I looked at macro and then I went micro. So, I looked at the macro piece. If you're operating on a regional or a local basis, you maybe don't have the luxury or need to do that. But I was had the responsibility of looking after the EMEA region. Um, and I like that type of analytical approach to understanding the big picture and then sort of getting down into the weeds of, okay, what's the verticals, where's the countries, and then thinking about what are the resources that I need to hire and what's my route to market, which was the last thing. So I looked at our market and decided we were 80% uh, direct business at the time I took the business over. That was okay for the US market because it's uniform. You don't have any language issues, you don't have any cultural barriers. And I immediately went, this looks wrong to me. We need to use the channel. We need to build a channel centric business. tip this upside down to try and gain scale and to grow rapidly and quickly, and then to hire channel orientated team across EMEA that I felt could then start to scale the business out. So at a really, really high level, there's lots of details that's beneath some of what I've been describing that I can go into. That's what I did. So sort of started at the macro factors and then looked at the sort of the products, the verticals, the people, and then the route to market, if you like. And then started to ask the business for resources. So started to hire people in France, people in Germany, people in the UK, some people in Romania, and then some people in Dubai in the Middle East, and started to sort of scale the business out from there.
Staying with the people side of it, what were you looking for when you were recruiting?
That's a brilliant question, Paul. So if I went back 10 years and look at a younger version of Noel, I would have really looked at and had a strong view around academic achievement, and I would have sort of put that up at the top and said, okay, well, where did this person maybe go to university? What was their achievements like? With a high performer at college, and I had a lot of experiences over the 10 years of hiring and firing people, and I guess in the likes of Micro Focus, because we scaled up a team, myself and a number of the other managers in Belfast from virtually nothing, and with some really really bruising engagements with staff because we made the wrong choices, and I personally made the wrong choices by doing that and looking for people with academic achievement. So big thing for me after 10 years of doing that and working with some fantastic managers in Micro Focus and Promisec was I went for values, and I realized that I needed to hire people that I personally could work with and that had the similar same values to myself. Were they a good person? Would they be trustworthy? Were they highly motivated? And those are not easy things to measure. Really, really difficult to measure in a hiring process. How do you measure if someone's got a high performer? Um, was there some level or degree of humility? So I would have asked questions around self-analysis and the interviewing process, to try and find, can I get a fit here, um, of someone that I can come in and work with? Is this someone that I can develop? Is this someone that I can learn from also? Are they going to bring things to the table that can help me learn and develop? So what are very, very much focused on values. And that might seem counterintuitive, because a lot of hiring managers get really fixated on a CV and they go, he was a high performer or she was a high performer that did A, B, C, D, and E. And a CV, I think, is a point in time, and a lot of people embellish them, but not always the truth. So a couple of things I would have asked for. I always ask questions like, can you tell me two or three traits or characteristics about yourself that people who know you well would say are negative? And it really rattles people to the core because they're like, never been asked anything like that in my life before. But to me, it's a deep rooted self evaluation question. Can you self evaluate? And when I'm talking about values and looking to hire people like that, people who have a growth mindset will be able to answer those questions. And some of the best people I've hired can tell you those answers honestly. They'll be able to say, do you know what? I'm hard to work with sometimes. I'm difficult to have bad days. I have a bad temper. Sometimes a bit disorganized. Um, and they'll not come back with, I'm a perfectionist, right?
Yeah.
Because somebody tells you a perfectionist, they're kind of like spot out of train spotting, when he's had his line of speed and he's doing the interview. Um, the answer always is, I work too hard. I don't have a life, So you're really looking for character traits and values and self-analysis. So somebody that can be honest with you about their life, their lifestyle, some of their faults and failings. I think when I could find people like that in an interview, I thought that's somebody you can grow. That's somebody that I can grow with as well.
And do you think it's easier to recruit like that if you're trying to build a team that's working remotely, that's working self-contained, because they have to have a lot of inner drive that maybe that they have to have a different kind of DNA and a different makeup. And so just say inner drive, they have to be self-starters. Like, it sounds like a cliched list of things, but they have to be able to put in the hard yards and motivate themselves. They do need to have that kind of growth mindset. They need to be very resilient. They need to have a lot of grit and determination. Do you find that easier to recruit because you're looking for people who are working remotely?
No, it's definitely a challenge. I would have put big faith in trying to reach into my own network. So I can honestly say I had a lot of success in the last 4.5 years in Opswat. It was a brilliant run for me in my career. Um, 80, I think 90% of the hires were people that knew other people and were able to vouch for those character traits. So we didn't go to market, we didn't look for recruiters. And I don't mean this disrespectfully to recruiters. Recruiters have a job to do. Their job is to sell resources, and their job's not to speak negatively or to tell you any of those negative character traits that you might realize after 6 months. I've
Yeah.
made the wrong decision. Um, so we had to put a great emphasis on speaking to the people within the team, and I was very lucky to hire some brilliant people. Hired a very good friend of mine, Sean Lennon, very high performer from a Micro Focus, and knew that when Sean joined that he would have, or I did know, who were the top performers, who were the people that had those brilliant self-directing character traits, as I described them. And they're not easy to find. So those are people that are self-motivated, intrinsic motivation. You don't need to ring them every morning to get them motivated, to get them active and up to speed. These are people that really want to win. They want to be successful. They want to earn money, to hit their targets. They want to get to President's Club. No, they're difficult to find. They're difficult to find. I think that's why people pay a difficulty with those people that are self-directing, highly motivated. I know part of what you do is talking about identifying and finding people with those character traits. It's not easy. It's really, really not easy to get the ones that are the winners. That particularly for me, and building a new operation and scaling it. The first the first number of hires in each country for me were absolutely pivotal. So they could take a region on a territory, take guidance from me, but then run and be self sufficient themselves.
So then, just some kind of detail in the background, the sort of people that you were selling to, the sort of level within those organizations and the verticals you were selling to, the numbers of people you had selling, and then rough numbers for success across the 12-month period.
Yeah, so we started at 3.75 million, and over the course of the 4.5 years that I was there, we grew to 26.2 million in 4 years. It was sort of meteoric growth. We were the highest growth region in Opswat. When I resigned, we were the highest revenue producing region. So the US was going 17 years and we were effectively going four, and we caught them in 4 years. So it was really stellar growth. We had that at that stage probably had a team of around 24, 25 people between engineering and sales and marketing at one stage. So it was a fantastic growth journey. In terms of the people we were selling to, I was really high level. It was very exciting. I know there's a war obviously in Ukraine at the minute. We would have sold a lot of our technology into military organizations, secret service, intelligence agencies all across Europe, NATO, multi-corps northeast to the NATO unit that's based in Poland, Estonia. So they would have bought and been using some of our technology. I can't say what that was, but they had a variety of our different technologies. We sold to a lot of different policing services across Europe, people like Europol. We also sold to a lot of nuclear power plants. So particularly sensitive organizations. As you can imagine, cybersecurity touches banking, insurance. We have a lot of what we would describe as tier one banks, tier one insurance companies across Europe and in the UK and Ireland, that would have used the Opswat stack. So we're right at I guess the apex of enterprise selling. We would have worked into CISO level or C-suite level. Um, Purchase values, we started at around $16,000 when I started working with Opswat, and we would have steadily grown the average sales value up to around $40,000. But within that, Paul, we would have had deals at 400,000, 600,000. Then we were into multi-million pound opportunities that were happening in year four. So we steadily moved up the food chain. We would have done a lot of government work. Intelligence agencies are typically sensitive areas of government. It was a very different sales motion. So our sales motions would have probably been 6 to 24 months. Some of our kiosks were installed in places like Daimler, Mercedes-Benz, and a lot of large pharmaceutical plants. Multiple site deployments. So very complex selling environment.
So between 6 months and 24 months, and you went from 3 million to 27 odd in 4 years.
Yeah.
That's a lot of activity. So and because I kind of know the answer to this, I'm kind of interested for you to explain how you would take that to market and what marketing support um, you would have the sales team or the field sales team would have enjoyed, what that looked like, and then that leads you up to what happened in Carrickmore, which is an
Yeah.
incredible journey. Like it's just when you think of it, it's quite incredible.
So it just started off, Paul, and if you go back to what I just describing at the start, the sort of the macro analysis, and then working our way, percolating its way down to what's happening on the ground. We then started to hire the teams and look at what was the best way of networking and meeting with some of the people that operated in these particular environments. And so we started to attend a lot of events, we would have a marketing team hired that would have supported us with an events calendar. So we would have built one EMEA wide. Now, I wouldn't have went to or let the team target what I would call low GDP countries. So Eastern Europe, as an example, I wouldn't have hired or deployed resources in Romania or Bulgaria, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. They're small countries. They don't have big spend. But in the likes of Germany, France, Nordic countries with a significant wealth, we would have had a range of events that we would have attended. We would have had a marketing team there, and they would have They would have supported us really well. So on the ground, we would have turned up at an event, maybe over 2 or 3 days. So it involved a lot of traveling. So myself and the team and whoever was on the ground, we would have been there setting up, and then pre-event invites. We might have had evening meals, drinks, things like that, and support of the events. We did a lot of them prior to COVID. We also would have done a lot of digital marketing campaigns. So we would have looked at industry journals. If you think of some of the industry areas that we focused into, particularly government, there are specialist government events that we would have attended. The SEI is an example, so it's kind of like an arms fair. It is actually an arms fair in London. The Excel, they sell military equipment and stuff like that. So would have looked at the route to market and the events that we needed to attend. We would also done digital marketing, so everyone knows all about that. The types of government clients we would have been working on, they're not on Instagram, they're not on Facebook. It's very much the route to market would have been direct touch with LinkedIn. I'm a huge believer in that. I think LinkedIn has a fantastic networking tool, gives you and your team's opportunity to reach out directly to the correct person, the correct buying persona. And then from a software perspective, we were always about demos. Could we move them into a demo where we get an opportunity to showcase the technology? And then obviously the likes of Google AdWords, for people that were, I guess buyer ready. They're in the market researching for the types of technology that we supplied. So we would have had those different parts of the marketing mix, if you like, Paul, the top of the funnel, supporting us from a sales perspective. From a selling perspective, but we would also work very closely. I always try to get the team to focus on the things they could control, and not to have I think sometimes sales teams get very focused on, the leads are not good or we don't get enough leads. And I really think people in a sales or business development will need to focus on what they're good at, and what activities that they can control. So we would have looked at a lot at account mapping. So if you manage the tier one bank and you sold to one subsidiary, how many other parts of that bank can you sell to? Can you get a reference from, if you look at, say, for example, HSBC or Credit Agricole, for example, would have been a client of ours. It's one of the top 20 banks in the world, with maybe 20 different subsidiaries. Airbus was a client of ours. Airbus have over 100,000 employees and 25 different subsidiaries. So starting to map out how can we go to market and use LinkedIn as a tool to direct touch and reach out to these people.
You that kind of is bringing together a whole lot of moving parts. You know, you got a lot of stuff to, single pane visibility, one dashboard with a lot of stuff going on. What was the most effective tool for you at that point? What was getting you the most visibility or the most interaction with decision makers?
At that point, I would say we started to grow substantially out of our existing client base. The account mapping, I would describe it. So we would have looked at those tier one organizations strategically. I would have had the team work with some of the partner ecosystem and start to identify the other parts within, for example, I'm using Airbus as an example because everyone knows the name. Airbus helicopters. How do we get a reference or a touch point from Airbus in Toulouse to Airbus in Germany, head of procurement? So strategically looking at those accounts and looking to grow. So we started to grow significantly out of the existing large tier one accounts that we had. We would have had a mix, Paul. I think around 32% of what I did as a group was new logo. That was the highest in Opswat. I think one of the teams in the US, they were about 19 or 20%. So we definitely built a culture where the team were very good at expanding out of their existing base, but also looking about new logo acquisition. And a lot of that would have been through referrals and the events, which is what I talked to you about earlier. We found that cybersecurity buyers went to those events, research. They like to look at different vendors. They did a lot of education. They're very, very bright, intelligent people, very well educated a buyer persona. So we would have found that those events were an excellent place to engage them.
Yeah, like it's a kind of a complex market, but it's a very cluttered market too, Noel, isn't it? You've got a lot of businesses making decision on a software that solves a problem now, but doesn't solve the problem that we don't know is around the corner, and so people tend to buy a lot of. Um, no, I'm not right saying this, but they're exposed to a lot of salespeople, and it's really hard to decide how you spend that budget, isn't it?
It is. Absolutely. As somebody said, describe it as shelfware. They buy a product that becomes redundant. So I find that was one of the big challenges for CISOs, but also for people like myself that are trying to engage with them. They had so many vendors. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of cybersecurity vendors. And one of the things that probably for a lot of business people is if you're in a relatively mature market space, is how do you differentiate what it is you do? How do you describe what it is you do in simple terms, particularly really highly technical technology? And we find that CISOs are generally, not generally, sorry, that's an incorrect statement. Anyone that's a CISO will have a very high level of education. They'll understand IT at a very deep level. However, that said, a lot of technology companies are very smart at positioning the approach to cybersecurity that they take. There's preventative approaches, then there's companies that say, don't worry about prevention because hackers have already breached your network and we'll help you identify where the issues are and sort of lock down your system. So there's so many different philosophies that's very, very difficult for those people to understand. I guess for us in Ops, what I really tried to do was ensure that we were really crystal clear about our differentiators and what it was that made us special. So who we were, what made us unique, and who was the people we wanted to speak to. So we had a very deep level of understanding what we did relative to some of the other products in the marketplace. So they could have been speaking to three or four different vendors that did similar things. So it was a very nuanced engagement with large clients. You had to know at a deep level. So we would have had a one-to-one sales approach. You would have had an engineer selling with a salesperson. So it was a
Yeah.
very complex selling process. Um, and that deep level understanding of the sort of cyber ecosystem was extremely important to get the message across to them for them to understand what it was you did and what made you special.
So this then leads on to the really you take into account everything you said there. So you're selling a sophisticated product to a very intelligent target audience that's completely inundated with the next best thing, and you know you've got to differentiate, you've got to stand out, you've got to resonate, you've got to substantiate all that sort of stuff, and then you kind of take it to real back to basics, a telephone call center. I don't want to call it that. That's what it was, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Well, SDRs.
yeah.
Talk us about that, because again, for those people who are listening that aren't from the north, or even who are from the north, or who are from the island of Ireland, Tyrone is a hotbed of many industries, mainly engineering, manufacturing, but I'm not being fair to the software sales industry in Tyrone, but it's not there aren't many, right? So
No.
take the story from where you had the idea of putting together a team to operate as SDRs from Tyrone.
Yeah, so I guess as we were growing, this is an Opswat. We were building significant traction, and um, I guess very significant confidence within the Opswat senior leadership team that what was happening in EMEA was bucking the trend, or surpassing the trends in the other regions. So one of the things that I had seen work was, and I believed could happen anywhere, was in an SDR, which is I guess a function. Sales development reps would be a mix between marketing and sales. So they're in the marketplace, operating off tools like LinkedIn, following up with emails, and then sometimes outreach via the phone. So I'd seen this many times over the last 10 years. I'd worked with lots of different agencies. I'd used agencies in London, I'd used agencies in Dublin, I'd used agencies in Germany that were trying to develop the market for cybersecurity companies. So it was very common practice for cybersecurity companies to come to EMEA and engage a large telemarketing company like Operatics, be very well known in the industry, spend a lot of money. They try and develop the market for you. They've got access to client accounts, the right contacts, set up demos and appointments. So I really wanted to try and do this in Tyrone, in Carrickmore, where I'm originally from. I just lived down the road, and I was very grateful that Patrick Tam, my boss at the time, said that's okay. I'll back you for this on a small scale. So he really wanted to understand about what type of tools would you put in place. Can you get access to language skills? There's not many people in the middle of Tyrone that speak multiple languages, but I went about the process of building a business plan to show them that it could be done and we could get access to skills. And the experience was there definitely around the tooling. So what type of tools do we need to buy? And then the likes of the skills required to scale those people up. I was very confident I had. So pretty experienced then in terms of scaling a team up. Um, Coaching and developing people, something I love doing. So I had no fear of not getting someone experienced. If I knew you had a willing attitude and somebody that wanted to learn, then I was willing to teach them. And we then went about the process of starting to hire and building up an SDR team in Carrickmore. And those people were calling all over Europe, managing business internationally, and they were part of, over that last year, that rise from 16 to 26 million. So we had 10 million pounds worth of growth last year, and a lot of that was driven from Carrickmore. So we had a couple of people sitting beside me that were managing our Middle East business, and it was going from strength to strength. They were doing a brilliant job. That did great experience elsewhere, and we put in place, or I put in place, sorry, some really good best practices to help the team grow rapidly. That goes back to the conversation that you and I had about culture. So it wasn't about me. I really tried to create an environment where everybody could support each other. We had daily huddles, we had scripts written, we did role plays every single morning, just to try and create excellence within the environment. And for me, it meant that I could bring someone in less skilled into an environment where it was okay not to know,
Mm-hmm.
and that you could learn, and that the environment was that people shared. They shared information, they shared experiences, they shared their expertise on the tools. So I felt that it really allowed me to scale and to grow, and to be a success.
How many did you have working there at its peak?
So we ended up with 12 people at one point in Carrickmore, and then obviously the business decided to shift some of the positions back to London, and I think there's a couple of positions went to Amsterdam, so maybe more salubrious locations than Carrickmore.
But again, reverse back to those, were those values that were important to you recruiting your field team? Are they non-negotiable values and cornerstones of your culture?
For me, they were absolutely non-negotiable. I made a couple of absolutely brilliant hires. I hired a couple of people from Yale. I don't know if I'm allowed to mention their names,
It's
but
okay.
I had a girl from Dungannon called Veronica Chistol. Veronica is from Moldova. Speaks 5 languages. She's incredible talent. So Veronica joined, and one of the things that myself and Sean Lennon liked about Veronica when we met her, she was so honest, so appreciative of the opportunity. I just thought she was brilliant value set. And when she came in and started working with us, it was very obvious that those were deeply ingrained traits that she had. And then I hired a few other people that I knew from Micro Focus that also had those same values. And each of them would say that it was a fantastic place. Still speak to them regularly. Patricia Owens, who lives actually quite close to me, she worked in a really high performing environment, but come in as a leader of the group, and really took those values on and created a fantastic place to work, a fantastic place to learn, and a fantastic place to succeed. So I didn't know, I would have taken longer to hire rather than give up on those values because they were important to me. I think if you bring in one bad apple as an example, it rots everything around it. That person is really negative or critical, or they've got a high level of ego where they want to judge other people.
And I'm conscious that how this will sound, but I mean it from a good place here. Like, you're making it sound very easy. This building a team up that's based in all over Europe and the Middle East and doing X, Y, and Z. And I was on some of those sales huddle conference calls with you and did some work with the team in Opswat, and but watch you grow that uh, boiler room, just to put a real bad name on it, but it wasn't the boiler room, it was the antithesis of that. Like, it was a really harmonious workspace where you had people coming in who had this energy and enthusiasm about what they did. And the thing I'm trying to get across is to the people that are listening that those people are out there,
There.
but taking somebody that's good into an organization that doesn't have a process or doesn't really fully believe in these cultural cornerstones, or a belief system, or sets about standard or non-negotiables, that can be lost very quickly, and you can be back to square one, and people will be disillusioned and not want to stay or perform. And I know that from coaching people on sales, whether it's social selling, whether it's account-based marketing, whether it's social media, whether there's none of it's easy. Like,
No, it's absorbing. I would have to say I probably did 9, 10 hours a day for the 4.5 years that I was there, and I often worked Sundays because I managed the Middle East and Israel, and it was enormous energy went in from my perspective, but it was around developing people. And I sort of felt like when I'd set those clear processes, I think when I talked to you at the start there, I talked about Promisec, that the culture was very deep rooted and negative and very difficult to change. But in Opswat, I was able to build that in from the start, that the team that came in knew that I was someone that wanted to invest in them, and that my door was always open, and that the training always happened, and the one-to-ones always happened, and the reviews always happened, and they get a chance to give me feedback. And the one question that I always ask, and I do this in the coaching all the time, is what can I do better? So I asked that question of all of the staff. So I always wanted to de-egotize the environment, that I wasn't superior, because I'm not, and I'm very aware that I'm not. So I learned as much from the people that I worked with as they may have learned from me. But the environment allowed us all to grow. And the fact that I was open-minded to put those practices in place, and it was the one thing that I always adhered to. So if I wasn't there, I did travel a lot. That, for example, Patricia would ensure that happened every morning, and we recorded and reviewed every day our role plays. So we beat on our craft every day. We practiced. We never shied away from it. It became the norm, and I felt that the team And I look back at a lot of the videos that we would have recorded. We'd have recorded our demo pitches and really obsessed over getting better. How do we be better? How do we be absolutely brilliant at this? And that sort of that feedback loop of what worked, what didn't, do different, that I got taught in Micro Focus really I'd worked a treat, and it just became how we were, as a group, and the sort of the wider field team across Europe. Um, we would have done that regularly, and then I also did the sales and sort of presentation training within Opswat for quite a while. It would have been one of the things that I drove across the team to try and sort of get the standard really, really high and consistent.
There's a big effort, but there's big reward in the business because the high ticket sales, high value, and your growth is obviously rewarded very well. But you again, you're kind of making stuff sound really easy about the rehearsal and the practice and the repetition and the recording and the analysis of that. Teams that do well in penalty moments are the ones that have normally practiced penalty moments.
Yeah,
And they've practiced the rigors of taking free kicks, not just in the first 5 minutes before practice. They'll be shooting them 40 minutes after practice has stopped because that's when you're tired and you're called upon to bring all your energies to bear. And maybe it's not just a sector thing, no, but there's loads of businesses that I see and sales teams that haven't got an awareness of what or how they're doing what they're doing. They shy away from recording calls because they're afraid that it's going to be used to beat them. That's a cultural thing. But they're not comfortable with video recording. They don't want to hear
yeah.
stuff, and it's hugely important to be able to get a sort of a timestamp of where you are and the direction you need to go to improve. Like it's called. Do you make it sound very kind of not very easy, but you had a lot of willing participants in that team in Carrickmore. You had a really good team. You recruited really well there.
I did. I did. I recruited well, and I was very lucky in that, cybersecurity and software is very profitable industry. So, the people that worked there were paid really well, and way above. We're sort of paying Belfast rates, in Carrickmore, but Belfast and an international stage is still relatively competitive. Um,
Absolutely.
but those processes, just go back to what I said at the start. That process of growth is okay. It's easy if you do it at the start. When you bring people into it initially, if it's embedded as part of your culture. I find it's extremely difficult. I know I think I mentioned to you earlier. I'm doing some consultancy with a Dublin-based technology firm at the minute as well. And one of the things that I find in engaging with their team is they're not used to it. They're not used to exposing themselves. They're not used to growth or being challenged or saying, right, present that to me. It's like someone saying, I can dance, and my view would always be, right, let's show me, and then we'll judge you, and we'll watch it back, and that can be an extremely painful process for people, and also from a management perspective, if you're not used doing it and you don't make it ingrained, it can also be very uncomfortable for a manager the first time round to go, look, I'm going to give you a bit of feedback. So I think you need a framework to make it safe, so they don't feel like they're being attacked. And the words that you choose are also really important. How you choose to frame the feedback
You've
as
said that
part of learning or
twice.
growth. Yeah,
Sorry to interrupt you, man. You've said that twice. A safe place, a safe space. I think that's really really important. That people feel that it's okay to make mistakes and not be ridiculed and laughed at and chastised. And the world that I came from way back, like you made a mistake, man. It was just you may start going to build your own gallows. There was no comfort, there was no room for it. Like, and you possibly as a sales leader maybe inherit that stuff very quickly. Whenever you become a manager, you think that's the way it's done, and it's only
yeah,
now looking in on businesses and seeing how good people do what they do that you realize that it's honey and vinegar. Like
yeah,
you can't keep good people satisfied and contented and want to come into work if they don't feel that it's first of all a really safe place for them to
yeah,
survive, thrive, and flourish. You spend 60 or 65% of your life subsidizing the rest of it. It has to be like that.
yeah.
And that goes back to the culture thing again.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the safe space. So I'm saying that right without really thinking about it. So I guess Damien Hughes, that's what, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, that did you expose me to some of his material, and read all his books, by the Barcelona way, and I loved the bit about the commitment culture, and then it sort of sent me on a path into reading other books, like Cy Wakeman's book No Ego, and obviously Black Box Thinking, Matthew Seed and Bounce and all of those. And one of the things that I picked up in the book was about psychological safety, which I suppose I'm referring to as safe space, and psychological safety underpins all good teams. That that it's safe, it's okay to feel, and it's okay to express that, and that's a really difficult concept. And I have to admit, until I sort of started maybe working with yourself and working in dedicated management roles and maybe getting exposed to really high level training and micro focus, I wasn't aware of it. I didn't know. I wasn't sort of experienced or smart enough to know what that meant. What does that mean? What does psychological safety mean for someone? And then through my experience in management, I realized it's from a leadership perspective, it's really about um you creating that environment and saying it's okay not to know. It's okay not to know, and maybe the manager, me personally, being vulnerable, showing vulnerability,
Yeah,
showing that you don't know, and that you're okay with not knowing. And then when you set that as a sort of leadership style, then everybody else knows. Well, he doesn't think he knows everything,
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
and that's genuinely the place that he comes from, or saying to some of the staff, well, look, I learned something new from you today. I didn't know that.
yeah,
And then that creates an environment, and it's kind of, I think it's counterintuitive to maybe how I thought management worked, or teams worked whenever I sort of started my career. That was the manager knew best, and they told
yeah.
you, and you never questioned them, and if you got things wrong, you get told you were wrong.
A really good example that I learned on that one was a guy called John DeMartini, and he talked about childbirth, and he talked about the external audience looking in and the expectation that the parents know how to bring up the child, and the child's coming in and looking up, going, "What are you at? You know, what are you doing?" You're supposed to know, and it's the expectation way back that you probably a lot to do with the culture we grew up in, where you had to, no matter what, you had to recognize authority, and authority was typically older, and so doctors, lawyers, dentists, priests, teachers were all always right, and you were very seldom encouraged to challenge that. And I
Yeah,
think I'm probably a child of that. I think that's probably because I learned very, very, relatively recently in the last 2 or 3 years, that very thing about a sports psychologist friend of mine talked to me in that language about something that was going on in him and he says, you need to feel psychologically safe wherever you are. And I never really, maybe I was speaking to Geraldine as well, who's Geraldine's my partner, who's a um, psychotherapist, that those are the things that the Irish landscape didn't cater for in the 80s and 90s
yeah,
and maybe
yeah,
the early 2000s and maybe as recently as last weekend, but that's another story. Um,
yeah.
clean the slate then. So Food Guard is the new, it's the,
Yeah,
tell me a bit about that.
really interesting. So, my obviously my background is not in the food industry, but I've been working on scaling and building teams over the last 10 years. So, a really good friend of mine, Darren McCrory, is from Tyrone. He runs a successful panel building business. He really fits the business mold of Tyrone. So he's manufacturing panels for the crushing and screening business, and he's a electronics and IT background. So we were out running. We did the Dublin Marathon together a few years back, and he had come across an opportunity with two guys that he had worked with in Dublin, to build. One of them's a 30-year veteran in the food safety market. So they had been through the process of developing and building software to help digitize HACCP and digital traceability processes for the food industry. So one thing led to another, and they had a product developed, and darn, and when we go back and talk about values, I probably, there's four of us, were four equal shareholders. Um, I probably felt like I'd come in at the end of the project, and I didn't deserve, if you like, a sort of an equal share. And I'll never forget one of the things that Darren said to me, and it really struck a chord. He says, I really value people, and I know you, and I value that you'll bring your bit to the table. When we've the software ready, that you'll be able to do what you did in Opswat and elsewhere. And it felt like I met obviously know Darren really well. He's a very good friend, and he's very clever, a guy with a really good engineering head, and met the other guys, and it felt like a brilliant fit. All of us had different skills. We all got along really well. There's no egos between us, and it felt like it could be a really, really good opportunity. And that was all sort of happening at the same time as there was a lot of change happening in Opswat, where the values that I really hold dear were definitely I felt not there any longer, and there was big changes on the team and where the resources were being deployed. So it started. I guess 3 or 4 months ago in earnest. The software is developed and ready. We've got our first couple of customers, and I've really started trying to take the product to market. And I feel really lucky that I've um, had that 10 or 12 years in management, and the experience of understanding how to scale and grow businesses, because I've been able to take that quite quickly then with I've hired a market manager, and she's been really successful, and she also has the values that I really hold dear. So I feel like I've been really, really lucky in the first hire that we have, and she's a brilliant girl, and she's doing a fantastic job. So we'll be really hopeful that all of that will come together, and we can start to scale the business quite rapidly. The one thing that I did pick up, I mentioned to you at Promisec, when Promisec did a lot of software demos, I realized very early on with Promisec that they had a problem. They'd invested 40 million in a product that did too many things, and their strategy was wrong. So the investors actually lost 40 million, and I was part of that at the end of the process. And I realized after year 8, I went, as a fresh pair of eyes coming in, this product does too many things, and there's lots of specialist products out in the market. And one of the things I find with FoodGuard is I don't think that's an issue. So all of the demos and all of the meetings I have keep building upon the opinion that we've got a really good product, and there's a real problem in the market that we solve. So I'll be very hopeful that those two marry together, and that it's going to be successful.
Good man. Well, I know factually that you're not doing as much international travel as you were, so you've a bit of free time in your diary to pursue that love of your life outside of your family, which is football coaching.
Yeah.
So just so far so good.
I've been coaching Gaelic football now for 18 years, and in my own club in Carrickmore, and then obviously within that time frame of um, meandered till a couple of other clubs with a brother-in-law of mine that opportunity come up I guess to get involved with him and to learn um, maybe from somebody that operated at a much higher level than me, which wouldn't be difficult in
You
football
operated at a
terms.
higher level than
Uh,
most people, like so.
and then I'm living in 6 Mile Cross, which is just down the road from Carrickmore, and I was asked to take the Beara senior team, which is a challenge I've taken on this year. A brilliant club, great bunch of lads, and it's been a brilliant experience for me so far. So we're 6 months into the season, and an intermediate level in Tyrone, which is really competitive.
So a lot of stuff that we've just talked about, we've spent about the last hour talking about, is relevant to that side of your life too. When you're talking about non-negotiables and cultural values, and for fear of quoting legacy and sweeping sheds and all that sort of stuff, you're looking at creating a nucleus of people that will kind of leave the ego outside and be authentic for 70 odd minutes and be themselves and do whatever it takes.
If I can, I've certainly tried to start to that. I'm very, very lucky in that I've a really outstanding management team that's helped me out. Local men that actually fit that bill and those values really well. They're great football men, but also great people. And I think that's a huge starting point when you have yourself and the rest of the management team, all with similar values. And I have to say, I've been in other clubs where maybe there's sometimes there's bigger personalities that are more difficult to manage. I certainly haven't seen that in Barra. They've been very good so far. So I can't I can't complain at all. I mean that genuinely.
No, I'm not going to push you any further on that, man. It's here. Listen, thanks very much. That's really, really brilliant to get your time. I know you're busy, and there's a lot of stuff there to kind of digest, and I hope people get the same value that I've got out of the conversation. Noel, if people want to check out FoodGuard, what's the website?
It's www.foodguard.ie.
Okay, and you're on LinkedIn, Noel Slane, if people want to reach out and connect up with you
Ab-
and all that sort of stuff.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I'll leave all the details at the bottom of the notes on YouTube and Spotify and all that sort of stuff. So, man, thanks very much for
Thank you, Paul.
brilliant. It's been deadly, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. Take care.